Your black turtlenecks, put on your best scowl, because we're going to look into the world of Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher who took pessimism to, well, new heights and made grumpiness a philosophical virtue. So brew yourself a strong cup of coffee. You'll need it to match Schopenhauer's bitterness, because by the end of this overview, you're going to have a clear and concise understanding of philosophy's most notorious curmudgeon. Born in 1788 in Danzig, young Arthur came into the world with a chip on his shoulder and a frown that would make even the most stoic German proud. His father, Heinrich Schopenhauer, was a wealthy merchant who valued worldly success and travel. His mother, Joanna, would later become a popular novelist. It's like the setup for a sitcom: the merchant, the writer, and the grumpy baby. Schopenhauer's life was marked by privilege and travel. His family moved to Hamburg when he was 5, fleeing from Prussian annex. And young Arthur got to see much of Europe, living for a time in France and in England. And this cosmopolitan upbringing gave him a broad perspective and also a keen sense of the suffering and absurdity of human existence. It's like he was taking a grand tour of Europe, collecting postcards of human misery. And at 17, Schopenhauer began working in his father's business, fulfilling a promise that he had made years earlier. But the young philosopher, he found the work soul-crushing, and after his father's death, possibly by suicide in 1805, Schopenhauer was free to pursue his true passion, being professionally depressed, studying philosophy. Schopenhauer enrolled in the University of Göttingen in 1809, initially studying medicine, but then switching to philosophy. It's like he realized that diagnosing the ills of the human body wasn't enough. He wanted to diagnose the ills of existence itself. And at university, he was introduced to the works of Plato and Kant, who would become major influences on his thoughts. He was particularly struck by Kant's distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we experience, and the noumenal world, the world as it really is, beyond our perception. It's like Schopenhauer found the philosophical equivalent of the Matrix and decided the red pill wasn't bitter enough. In 1811, he moved to Berlin to study under the famous philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte. However, Schopenhauer quickly became disillusioned with Fichte's teachings, which he saw as obscure and nonsensical. It's like he went to a rock concert only to discover the headliner was just making noise. In 1818, at the age of 30, Schopenhauer published his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation. This work, which he believed solved all the problems of philosophy, was initially met with crickets. It's like he dropped the hottest mixtape of the 19th century, but everyone was too busy dancing to Hegel to even notice. Some of the key concepts we'll find is the world as representation. Schopenhauer agrees with Kant that we can't know the world as it really is, only as it appears to us. It's like he's saying reality, you can't handle reality.
You can't handle the truth!
And then the world as will. Here's where Schopenhauer gets original. He argues that the thing in itself, the fundamental reality behind appearances, is will, a blind, aimless striving that manifests itself in all things. It's like he's telling us the force that makes flowers grow is the same one that makes you crave that third slice of pizza. And then the will to live, this universal will, manifests in living things as the will to live, a relentless drive for survival and reproduction. It's like Schopenhauer is the first philosopher to really get why cat videos are so popular. And this all led to the fourth piece, which is suffering is fundamental. Because the will is never satisfied, suffering is an inevitable part of existence. Desire leads to temporary satisfaction, followed by boredom, followed by new desires. It's like we are all hamsters, just kind of running in place. And then 5 is art as temporary escape. Schopenhauer sees aesthetic contemplation as a temporary respite from the will's endless striving. It's like he's saying, sure, life is suffering, but have you tried staring at a painting? And then 6 is compassion as the basis of ethics. Recognizing that all beings are manifestations of the same will, Schopenhauer argues for compassion as the foundation of morality. He's the philosophical godfather of we're all in this together, except he'd add, and it sucks for everyone. And despite its initial lack of success, the world as will and representation would go on to become one of the most influential philosophical works of the 19th century. It's like Schopenhauer was the underground indie band of philosophy. It just took a while for the world to catch up to his level of angst. And so after the initial failure of his magnum opus, Schopenhauer turned to writing essays. And these shorter works were collected in books like Periega and Per la Palmana. And these finally brought him the recognition he craved. It's like he switched from writing concept albums to producing hit singles. And some of his most famous ideas from these works include, first, On the Suffering of the World. Schopenhauer argues that life oscillates between pain and boredom. It's like he's saying life is either ouch or meh. 2, On the Vanity of Existence, he suggests that life is a constant becoming without ever truly being. It's like we're all baking a cake that never quite finishes cooking, we just keep checking on it. And then on Noise, Schopenhauer had a particular hatred for noise, which he saw as a disruption of thought. It's like he was the original grumpy old man yelling, "Turn down that racket!" And then on women, unfortunately, Schopenhauer was notoriously misogynistic. His views on women are like that embarrassing uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. It's just best to ignore, but definitely don't invite him back. And then 5 on genius. Schopenhauer believed that genius was the ability to see the universal in the particular. It's like he's saying a genius is someone who can look at an apple falling and see the entire universe in motion and then get depressed about it. And these essays made Schopenhauer more accessible and brought him fame in his later years. It's like he finally found his audience, other grumpy people who enjoyed beautifully writing complaints about existence. Now, despite his pessimism, or perhaps because of it, Schopenhauer's influence on philosophy and culture, it has been profound. First up, we have Friedrich Nietzsche. Although Nietzsche later rejected much of his pessimism, he was initially a great admirer. Like Schopenhauer was the mainstream emo band that inspired Nietzsche's more experimental post-emo philosophical punk. Sigmund Freud, Schopenhauer's ideas about the irrational forces driving human behavior, it influenced some of Freud's development of his psychoanalysis. And then Ludwig Wittgenstein. The early Wittgenstein was influenced by Schopenhauer's ideas that ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. It's like Schopenhauer was saying, being good is beautiful, man, and Wittgenstein was like, whoa, deep. And then Eastern philosophy. He was one of the first Western philosophers to take Eastern thought seriously, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism. It's like he was the philosophical hipster who was into Eastern wisdom before it was cool. And then existentialism. Although not usually classified as an existentialist, his focus on the absurdity and suffering of human existence, it prefigured many existentialist themes. It's like he was the brooding grandfather of existentialism who's sort of setting the stage for the full-blown existential crisis of the 20th century. His influence can also be seen in literature. Writers like Mann, Proust, and Burgos were all influenced by, you guessed it, Schopenhauer. It's like he was the philosophical muse of a whole generation of elegantly depressed novelists. And music. Richard Wagner was a great admirer of Schopenhauer, and his ideas influenced some of his later operas. We often think of him as this gloomy, pessimistic philosopher, and he had his quirks and he had his contradictions. First, we have the poodle lover. He was devoted to his poodles, even writing them into his will. It's like he decided if human companionship is disappointing, at least dogs are loyal. And then he had a strict daily routine, include a long walk with, you guessed it, his poodle. It's like he was practicing what he preached about will. His will just happened to will a reality-structured day. And the flute player, despite his hatred of noise, he played the flute daily. It's like he was saying, all noise is terrible, except for the noise I make. And then the lonely philosopher, he never married and was known for his problematic relationship with women. It's like he took his own advice about the misery of human existence a bit too seriously in his personal life. And then the dualist. As a young man, he once pushed a woman down a flight of stairs for making too much noise. And when taken to court, he argued so persuasively that the woman was ordered to pay him a small sum for the rest of her life. It's like he was determined to win at pessimism in truth, in theory, and in practice. So why should we care about this grumpy old philosopher from 2 centuries ago? Well, for all the doom and gloom, he does offer us some profound insights. First is the power of the unconsciousness. Long before Freud, he was recognizing the power the unconsciousness drives in shaping human behavior. It's like he was one of the first to say, you're not the boss of you, your unconsciousness is. And then the importance of compassion, oddly enough, in a philosophical landscape dominated by reason. He emphasized the importance of compassion. It's like he was saying, sure, we can think our way through life, but maybe we should feel a little bit too. And the value of art. His ideas about art as a way to temporarily escape the tyranny of the will. It's been hugely influential in aesthetics. You could say he was the philosophical justification for binge-watching Netflix. And then the limits of optimism. While his pessimism might seem extreme, his critique of mindless optimism is a useful corrective to the positive thinking industry. It's like he's the philosophical antidote to toxic positivity. And then the connection between Eastern and Western thought. His interest in Eastern philosophy had helped pave the way for greater dialogue between Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. It's like he was the philosophical Columbus, discovering that the world was round and there was interesting stuff on the other side. So as we wrap up our journey through the gloomy landscape of Schopenhauer's philosophy, you might be feeling a little down, but don't worry, that's exactly how he would want you to feel.